back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and I made a ridiculous amount of decks this year, more than I ever have before, both for myself and also for my channel, my patrons, and just random decks in general. And a lot of these decks come from a lot of different places, whether it be just an idea I come up with. You know, doing my channel, I used to make a ton of decks before I made my channel. That's why I made my channel, because I made so many decks. But doing my channel even increases that, because again, I come out with videos and I start thinking, that's not a bad idea. Like my 5 builds video in particular that I do, where I come up with these interesting ways to build around certain commanders. A lot of those I'll just go ahead with myself and build around. And in fact, I have a couple of decks now that have originated from my 5 builds video. I mean, for myself. My Torgar deck, which I put together this year, came from my 5 builds idea. And I have my very newest deck that I just put together. And yes, I made a video like a month ago talking about all the new decks I made for myself this year. And I made 2 decks after that video. That's how many decks I made just for myself in paper this year. And my newest deck is also from a 5 unique builds video. I went in a little bit of a different direction there, but essentially the same idea, which I will be talking about coming up in a video, I guess, next year, because this is going to be the last video you are watching from me for this year. And I wanted to do this in a particular order because my last video was my review of the year for Commander, and it was largely negative. I want to do this after, though, to show a contrast of, okay, even though like you hate all the Universes Beyond, you hate all the new cards, you don't like the power creep, all the commanders that came out this year I wasn't a really big fan of. I didn't even do a video about that this year, but yet I still built a ridiculous amount of commander decks. You still can do that, right? Again, I'm sitting here trashing Magic for the most part in the last video, but at the same time, I'm still building a ton of decks, right? You can do both. It's not like I hate this game. I love this game, even though I'm not a big fan of the direction that both Magic the Gathering and Commander is going moving forward. I'm still building a ton of decks, and I'll never run out of ideas. I've made so many 10 deck ideas videos, 5 unique builds videos, all of these, and I'm still coming up with new ideas all the time, still making new decks. Some of these I've revisited. Some of these ideas are ones I came up with before, and some of these are even commanders that I've built around before that I'm like, okay, we can revisit it again. I've been doing my series of old commanders that have been getting better, because that's one of the upsides to getting all these new cards is, okay, well, now we got some more we can build around here. But sometimes I do just come up with new ideas to build around these old commanders, right? So I am going to just be unloading a ton of decks on you guys. I have deck lists for all of them. Buckle up. I'm going to try to move through it fast. Let's start out with what I'm calling Win, Lose, or Draw. This deck, this is essentially a Nekusar deck, but with white in it, because I think white is great in this theme. And earlier this year, I did do a white-black version of this deck, which is I'm giving my opponents draw. It's that sort of false hug effect you get from a Nekusar deck, where you want your opponents to draw cards. And of course, white does that incredibly well, right? So I have a Secret Rendezvous. I'm going to draw 3 cards, and my opponent's also going to draw 3 cards, but I also have an Underworld Dreams in play, so they're getting punished for that, right? Again, it's doing the Nekusar thing, but I'm basically just adding white into the deck. So you're doing that huggy Nekusar thing, sort of, but also hurting your opponents for it. Obviously, I have Nekusar in the 99. I'm just adding white. I went on a bit of a 4-color thing for a while. Again, I put my own 4-color deck together in paper for the first time ever this year as well. And then I started going, okay, here's some other interesting ideas you can do in 4-color. Of course, when you're doing 4-color, partners end up being a lot of thing that you are using. I went with Wernog here because he kind of is doing my opponent's draw, with obviously giving those clue tokens, card advantage for you as well. And obviously I got to do the Friends Forever thing. So I put Bjorn on Nightfall Alchemist, which is good for, obviously we're making artifact tokens that we can sacrifice, and goading creatures is good for just keeping your opponents off of you, because obviously we're winning with the, my opponents get hurt by having cards in hand and drawing cards and that kind of thing. So I thought it worked. I did have a patron point out that probably an even better combination here would be Ludwig, because Ludwig is obviously letting your opponents draw, which works, and Tymna, because Tymna is having you draw. Those are both powerful commanders, might make you a target, so just be warned, you could swap them out, though. This is very much a Method 2 deck, not really built around Wernog and Bjorna, so you could easily swap out for better partner commanders, but That's the deck I have in the description. Moving on, another theme that I have revisited an absolute ton, I don't know why I'm obsessed with it, is the I'm forcing my opponents to block my creatures. I've done it before with Gore Muldrak, which wasn't a great commander there, but I wanted blue and green. I thought blue-green were the best colors there because, of course, green has the majority, if not all, of the lure effects where I'm forcing my opponents to block. And blue has a lot of the creatures like Sappers and Air that just really want to be blocked. So I'm revisiting that theme, and I did it because I talked about it in a video. And again, I wanted to maybe I'll do this for myself. This is definitely a deck that I was very close to putting together for myself in paper because I found a commander, Madame Vastra, that I thought worked great. And one of the issues that you will run into with a theme like this is, okay, I want my creatures to be blocked, but what if they're not, right? What if I don't have a lure effect? I attack with my Elven Warhounds and nobody wants to block it because, of course, then their creature gets put on their top of their library and I don't have a lure effect that I can use. So now it just becomes a really bad 2/2 creature. Well, what if I also don't want it to be blocked, right? If I play both themes in the same deck, that really works. So that's what I ended up doing here, right? If I have a coastal piracy effect in play, okay, well, you block my Elven Warhounds, it goes on top of your library. You don't block my Elven Warhounds, I'll draw a card. Win-win for me, right? One scenario is maybe better than the other, but ultimately it's a win-win for me. Essentially, what you're doing is you're turning all your creatures into Slith Striders, which of course is in the deck. When this guy becomes blocked, you draw a card, but when he deals combat damage to a player, so in other words, doesn't become blocked, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. So either scenario you're okay with, that's what we're doing here. We have a whole bunch of effects that want our creatures to be blocked, and we have a whole bunch of effects that don't want our creatures to be blocked, want them to get in for damage. So either way, we're okay with the scenario. And that's why Madame Vastra works, because she must be blocked if able. And whenever a creature dealt damage by Madame Vastra this turn dies, create a clue or food token. So this is a creature that we want to be blocked and obviously has to be blocked. And that works with what we're doing because, of course, I can attack with my commander. And if I have my Cold-Eyed Selkie in play, now it's got Island Walk, but it's a better option for getting in for damage because if my opponent has a creature that can block my Cold-Eyed Selkie, well, it's got to block my Madame Vastra. So now I can get in for damage with it, right? That's why this commander, even though it seems like the opposite of what we want to be doing, actually works in this theme. And I really like how this worked out, where I'm doing that theme that I've revisited a bunch of times, but I've added in okay, well, what if we don't get blocked? I have a backup plan for that as well. Really great deck. Tetzimoc is a commander that I just think is a funny old commander that this is the era where they started printing cards for commander, but they were still printing legendary creatures that weren't made to be commanders, which is what I love, right? It has this really unique ability here. Pay a black and reveal Tetzimoc Primal Death from your hand. Put a prey counter on target creature, activate only during your turn. And of course, you got to have it in your hand. Can't do that from the command zone. That makes it difficult. It's one of the few commanders in the format that you actually want in hand. But of course, there are things we can do there. We can use, obviously, a command beacon to put it into our hand. We can also use Netherborn Altar to put it into our hand from the command zone. We can also just cast it. We can cast it and then sacrifice it and then just start getting it back from graveyard to hand. Obviously, I got a lot of ways in the deck to be doing that, sort of recycling our commander essentially so that we can use that ability, right? Once you put prey counters on all your opponent's stuff, when your commander enters the battlefield, it destroys each creature your opponent's control with a prey counter on it. That's pretty great. I also built around the theme of, this is more of a counters theme. That's the direction I went here. This is a essentially mono black counters theme a little bit. I have effects in the deck, like a Nakarli or Scavenger, that wants our creatures to be having counters on them, obviously. And by the way, your commander does not destroy your creatures with prey counters on them, only your opponents, so you don't have to worry about that. We also have stuff like Fane the Broker that is going to be removing counters from our stuff. One of the reasons I revisited this is because it works with committing a crime, right? Your commander commits a crime very easily because you could pay 1 black to commit a crime, right? You're targeting your opponent's stuff. So that stuff I added in here as well. Really great commander. Again, I could have talked about this in the Commanders Getting Better series. I'm throwing it in here. I actually made this deck. It is in the description. All right, Sekki Seasons Guide, another one that I have revisited recently, and I just talked about this, and that's the reason why. Again, that's how this whole process happens. I make a video, and this one in particular was the most underrated commanders in the entire format, in my opinion. And this is a fantastic build around, really cool art as well. There's a lot of neat things you can do there. I really went with almost an aristocrats theme here a little bit. Mono green aristocrats, you're dealing damage to your own creatures. Of course, that makes tokens with your commander, but then it's going to also kill the tokens that you just made. But if I have a fecundity in play, for example, I'll draw a ton of cards, right? So that's what I'm kind of building around here. It is a difficult deck to play. I'm not going to go in here too much. I know it would be nice if I explained exactly what's going on here, but then we're going to have a 6-hour-long video here talking about all the decks I got to talk about and going in depth with each one. If you go back and watch the underrated commanders video that I made, I go over a lot of those things in that video. A little bit of the I'm hitting my own creatures theme, also a little bit of the I want my creatures to be dying, or I'm okay with my creatures dying. I got stuff in here like Cyclone that is dealing damage to my own creatures, or Time Bomb. There is some funny ways in mono green to do that. There's also a little bit of non-bows here, right? Again, I got Vigor in the deck, which is going to work with some things, but also be a non-bow with other things. So you do have to be a little careful here. It's not the easiest deck in the world to play, but there is some really neat interactions here, and I think a really great commander. Rhinos. Again, I was doing the 4-color thing. I was trying to make a 4-color deck in each 4-color combination. And this one is just the Rhinos idea that I came up with, Siege Rhino, that is. I made a deck, again, in my last video where I talked about, all the decks that I made. I think this is my 3rd time doing this particular kind of video this year. I made an Abzan version because, of course, Siege Rhinos is Abzan, and I was trying to do let's just use our Siege Rhino as much as we can. Obviously, this theme is better with blue because blue does the token copy creation thing, right? I can just Cackling Counterpart my Siege Rhino, get that effect, and it is worth building around, right? Draining all your opponents for 3 life and you gain 3 life is pretty darn good. Obviously, just a better version of this is Grey Merchant of Asphodel. It's just doing that same thing, except probably better. Well, in a mono black deck, it's better. Here, maybe not. You're in a 4-color deck. It's definitely doing that thing, not necessarily better. I would need at least one other black pip in order to get the 3 life. So, it is better, I guess. But essentially, the deck is I'm copying, cloning my Siege Rhino, but you could also do it with a Grey Merchant of Asphodel. For the commander, I chose Atraxa Grand Unifier. It's again, just a great commander I'm a method 2 commander, obviously, because you can just dig into your deck. That's all that the commander is really for. It's also a good commander, I guess, to do the copy cloning thing as well. If I want to just Cackling Counterpart my Atraxa Grand Unifier, I'll get the ETB. Obviously, it'll die right away, but I still get to look at the top 10 cards and put a bunch of stuff in my hand. So it does work with the theme of what we're doing, but essentially this is Siege Rhino, WinCon. I copy clone it as much times as I can. My phase locking deck, which I can't remember if I've actually covered or not. I definitely talked about it. Again, I talked about it in, for sure, a 5 builds video, maybe another video as well. I'm not sure if I revisit it or not. I make a lot of videos and I make a lot of decks, but whether I have or not, I'm throwing it out here. This is a completed deck list. I don't know if I actually did a completed deck list yet. So this is a completed deck list. Abuelo Ancestral Echo is the commander because it blinks stuff, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Again, you'll have to go watch that video. I'll try to put the link to go over exactly what we're doing here. Basically, it's a combination of ideas that don't seem to work well together, but I think they do. It is, first of all, the anti-ETB strategy. So I have a Torpor Orb, or I have a Hushwing Griff, effects like that shut off ETBs, and then I have really bad ETB creatures, or creatures that are really good if they didn't have their really bad ETB, like Eater of Days, right? It enters the battlefield and you skip your next 2 turns. That sucks. But if you have a Torpor Orb or a Hushwing Griff or any of those effects, there's a bunch in the deck, obviously. If you have any of those effects in play, this guy's just a 9/8 flying trample creature for 4 mana. That's amazing, right? And that's essentially the win con in the deck. We're just attacking people with our giant creatures. Sky Swallower is another one. When it enters the battlefield, your opponents gain control of all other permanents you control. That's awful, but it is a 5 mana 8/8 flyer. So if we have the Torpor Orb in play, we just get a 5 mana 8/8 flyer that we can smash our opponents with. We also have, and with our commander, that's why we have it as our commander, the Wormfang Manta combo, where it enters the battlefield, you skip your next turn, but when it leaves the battlefield, you get an extra turn. So this is an infinite turns combo with our commander and a Torpor Orb effect. Leave it in or take it out of the deck if you want to. There also is another creature, and that's why I went down this road with a very interesting ETB that you might want to shut off, which is Disciple of Callous Nin. When this enters the battlefield, starting with you, each player chooses up to 5 permanents they control. All permanents other than Disciple of the Callous Nin that weren't chosen this way phase out. And I discovered this as I was exploring this theme, and I didn't think that there was enough to make at least a 2-color deck with those ETB creatures, the negative ETB creatures that we could build around. There's only a handful. So I thought, well, we do have a lot of room in this deck to do something else. And I thought Disciple of Callous Nin would work here. We can shut off this ETB, which you might want to, you might not. If you have opponents that are way ahead of you, maybe you don't want to shut this off. But I think it's okay for us to shut this off. And then all we get from this is permanents can't phase in, which does work with what we're doing, I think. And so I put a bunch of the phasing stuff in here like a reality ripple. And the reason why this kind of works is because, of course, you have creatures that are really, really powerful that your opponents are going to want to get off the table. And I can phase it out with a reality ripple. And of course, when things phase in, the ETB doesn't do anything. So once my Eater of Days is on the table and, my opponent's like, okay, we'll destroy the Torpor Orb. That'll screw them up. Now I can just ride my Eater of Days for a while and I can phase it out if they target it. And if it phases back in, again, I don't have to worry about the ETB anymore. It also works with the Disciple of Callous Nin, where I can now reality ripple my opponent's thing. And of course, it won't phase back in. This is a way to, not permanently get rid of it, but get rid of it for a long, long time. Galadriel's Dismissal is a way I can phase out my opponent's entire team. And again, there are very much some non-bows in this deck. You got to be careful. I can phase out my opponent's entire team with this. And of course, with my Disciple of Callous Nin, it will not phase back in. So I have a bunch of those funny old effects in the deck as well, like Equipoise, a card that you've probably never seen in a Commander game before. And I'll let you read that card to figure out how it's going to work in this deck. Sands of Time is a backup for our Disciple of Callous Nin. This will make players skip their untap steps, which of course makes it so that things don't phase back in. In case you didn't know, things phase in on untap. So if everyone's skipping their untap steps, things won't phase back in. So this is a backup for a Disciple of Callous Nin. Really interesting deck. Again, I would recommend that you be a more advanced player before you tackle this one. It is going to be difficult to play for sure. Narfi, Betrayer King. And this is one that I did because, again, 5 unique builds video. This was a patron idea. They have a deck like this where it's basically you're doing the reassembling skeleton thing, but with a mana value of 5, because of course your commander has a mana value of 5, and with a power toughness 4/3 rather than just a 1/1. And how can we take advantage of that? And of course, we can take advantage of that with effects like one of my, new favorite cards, but I talked about that in a video recently as well. Xanthra Demon, which I've thrown in a couple of decks now. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature other than Xanthra Demon. Then each opponent loses life equal to the sacrifice creature's power. So with this in play, all my opponents will lose 4 life, not bad, and I can also swing with it. It's a big creature. Then, of course, I can easily get my commander back from the graveyard, obviously, because it is a essentially reassembling skeleton. I could just keep getting back over and over again. So it becomes every turn for 3 mana, I get to drain my opponents for 4. Pretty good. Obviously, it's a snow creature, and we need snow mana, so I went with the snow theme as well. This is a combination of those things. It's a combination of, let's use our commander as a reassembling skeleton, and also I'm throwing a little bit of a snow sub-theme in here as well. Pretty neat deck. I made a Nael Aviso Aeronaut deck, and funny enough, a commander, I actually had already made this deck, and I had a guy comment on my good luck making these commanders, right? These are the worst commanders to build around video, which I revisited as well, talking about the hardest commanders to build around. And some guy said, oh man, you got to put Nael on that list. So bad. It's got the domain ability and it's only a Simic commander. Whenever Nael deals combat damage to a player, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the basic land types among lands you control. Put one of them on the top of your library and the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. Then if you have 5 or more basic land types among lands you control, you get to draw a card. So of course, pretty hard to do in a Simic deck, but it's not impossible to do. And there, in fact, is a few ways to do it. So I went ahead and did that. I already had done that. One of the main reasons is because Overlord of the Hauntwoods came out in Duskmourn, and I'm like, okay, well, that's making that tapped colorless land token named everywhere that is every basic land type. So all you need is that. Once you have that guy in play, it's every basic land type. That fulfills the 5 lands that have the basic land types, right? Because if you have one land with all the 5 basic land types, then you have the basic land types among lands you control, and you get the draw card. Oma, Queen of Vesuva, was another card that came out this year that will do a very similar thing. You put an everything counter on a land you control, and Each land with an everything counter on it is every land type in addition to its other types. There's actually quite a few ways to do this in green. So I don't think this is that hard of a commander to get the domain ability, to be honest, because green does this really, really well. But we needed a little bit more to build around, and I once again revisited that same blue-green have my creatures be blocked themed. So you're going to see Elven Warhounds in here, and you're going to see Sapperzan Air and all the lure effects, because I did that as well. Because again, I did the same thing where, okay, we have a commander that wants to be getting in for damage. So I can do all of the same stuff, where I can do the reconnaissance mission stuff where I want to be getting in for damage with my creatures, because of course my commander wants to be getting in for damage, but I threw all that other stuff in as well. Obviously the lure effects and all that doesn't work with our commander, but our commander works with getting in for damage with our creatures, which works with all of that as well. So very similar theme here. But then again, I'm also doing the domain thing. So you're going to see some domain stuff in here as well, because we're also doing that. I'm calling this deck Monkeyworld. And in fact, I have two versions of this deck. And this is built off of one of the funniest combos I've ever heard of. Not my idea. Someone else came up with this, and I thought it was a great one, using Monkey Cage, because whenever a creature enters, you sacrifice Monkey Cage, and it creates X 2/2 green monkey creature tokens, where X is that creature's mana value. Of course, there is a few ways to use this. I have people throw out the idea of Planar Guide as another way that you can blink all creatures at once, and they come all back in. And of course, this sees all of them entering the battlefield. You will only be able to sacrifice it once, but sacrificing is not part of the ability here, right? If it was, it would say, if you do, and it doesn't say that. So your Monkey Cage will see all the creatures entering the battlefield. The even funnier way to do it is with Warp World. This is a Warp World Monkey Cage combo deck. That's why I call it Monkey World. I made two versions of this deck. The first one is black and red. And of course, the big advantage to having black here is we can just tutor for the pieces that we need. The funny thing is you don't want Monkey Cage in your hand. You want it in your library. That's how the combo works, right? I want to cast Warp World and then get Monkey Cage as one of the cards that I reveal off the top. And again, once Warp World has entirely resolved, then you get all the ETBs on the stack, and Monkey Cage will see all the creatures, not just yours, all the creatures that entered the battlefield. You will get, I imagine, a lot, probably enough monkeys to end up closing out the game if they have haste, which of course red does that very well. So I got cards like Ogre Battle Driver, right? If that is also one of the cards that we flip off the top, there's obviously some randomness here, then all my monkeys will get +2/+0 in haste, and that's game over guaranteed, right? So that's what the deck is doing. The black-red version, I have Lagomos Hand of Hatred as the commander, which is a tutor on a stick in the command zone, which seems pretty good here. I built around it a little bit. There is a little bit of a sacrifice theme. Obviously, we want to be able to use that ability because we want to go get our Warp World. Don't go get your Monkey Cage. Your Monkey Cage wants to be in your library. You only want your Warp World in hand, which is why we have a Fire Prophecy in the deck, right? Fire Prophecy will put our Monkey Cage back into our library, which is, of course, where we want it. Lagomos works here. I think it's an underrated commander as well, and I built around it a bit, but mostly it's here because the ability to go tutor for the cards we want. I also built a blue-red version of the deck, and the reason why is because I playtested the black-red version, and I was running into some problems, because, of course, it's completely random getting your Monkey Cage off the top. I wanted to increase the chances. Of course, blue will allow you to search for instants and sorceries, which is, of course, what we want. We want our Warp World. It'll allow you to do something else, which actually I've realized is really important here with Mana Severance. Mana Severance searches your library for any number of land cards and exiles them. And then you shuffle your library, and there's a couple neat situations where you might want to use that, and this is one of them. When you Warp World, of course, you'll be getting lands off the top. If you exile all the lands from your library, you are very much increasing the chances that you'll get your Monkey Cage, which is, of course, what you want to be doing, right? So that's actually a great way to increase our chances. This is all randomness. We want to increase our chances. Because we're doing that, it also combos. I threw another neat combo in the deck with Goblin Charbelcher, of course. We want to reveal cards at the top of our library until we reveal a land card. So if we Mana Severance and exile all the lands from our library except for one single mountain, because of course if a mountain is revealed that way, it deals double damage. What we're doing in the deck works with Goblin Charbelcher, so I threw a Goblin Charbelcher in the deck as well as a funny, neat little combo that works. I also threw selective memory in here, which will search our library for any number of non-land cards. So that will work as well. Again, you can do both with your monkey cage. Don't want to do it with the Charbelcher because, of course, it won't work very well. But again, this is another deck. There's a little bit of non-bows. You got to be careful with how you're doing it. I have Rootha as the commander here, another very underrated commander in my opinion, because, of course, being able to copy our Warp World will be pretty great. It is a lot of mana, but we will get 2 resolutions of the spell essentially, and what'll end up happening is we'll get 2 kicks at the can, and we will Warp World. The first one will resolve, and are we going to get our monkey cage? If we do, what ends up happening if we get it the first time is we will get all those monkeys in play, and then the next Warp World copy will resolve. And of course, our monkeys are permanents that we have in play. So that just increases the chances. We'll just get more stuff essentially off the top, right? Because we've just created 50 monkeys, and all those monkeys will shuffle in, and essentially we'll get all of our permanents that are left, because this, being an Izzet deck, doesn't have a ton of permanents. So we're going to for sure get our monkey cage the second time around, but it will also get a whole bunch of other stuff as well. So that's why copying Warp World will actually work really good here. Pretty neat deck, I think. There's a lot of really neat interactions here. Moving along, another commander that I've revisited a few times, Kazuul, Tyrant of the Cliffs. I just think it's a great commander. Another one that I talked about in my underrated commanders video. And another commander that I would say I probably just added a few things in here that we've gotten recently that particularly work. I have a lot of the combat trick stuff in here, a little bit of the mono red pillow fort as well. There is a lot of neat things that I'm doing in this deck. I think this is just a great underrated commander. I mean, that's it. I just revisited this commander because I think it's a great one. If you want to play Kazuul deck, the deck list for this is in the description. Moving on, I'm calling this one Dracoplasm Make It Happen, because I have been trying so hard to make Dracoplasm work in the commander format. I just have always loved that card. Again, the nostalgia thing goes way back in the day for me, all the way back to Tempest Block, one of the first multicolored cards I ever cracked open in a pack. I thought it was real neat. It is a very interesting card in Izzet colors. If it was a black-red card, it would probably be in a lot more decks because, of course, it's in the sacrifice theme. I wanted to make a deck where it worked really, really well, and I actually combined 2 ideas here that I thought worked really funny together. So, of course, if you're doing a secret commander idea, you have that card in the 99, you got to get it. Okay, so how are we going to get our Dracoplasm? And one of the things you can do if you're doing that secret commander, I need to hunt for a specific creature in your deck, is you can do the polymorph thing. And the polymorph thing, what it does, of course, you destroy target creature and it can't be regenerated. Its controller reveals cards on top of their library until they reveal a creature card and puts that card onto the battlefield. So, of course, you typically would use it on your opponents. I don't know, in the commander format, it's pretty dangerous to use a card like this on your opponents, but you can, of course, use it on yourself. And if you only have a couple of creatures in your library, well, you're guaranteed to get that thing. Again, it's sort of like the Kethek Secret Commander idea. You're doing the same thing here. And of course, there is a few effects like this in Izzet colors. There's a couple blue ones, there's a couple red ones. The only problem with this strategy is, of course, how do I use the polymorph effect if I don't have any creatures to destroy, right? I have to destroy one of my creatures in order to get it. Of course, you can just use your commander, and I do have a commander that is cheap here. Dalekos, Crafter of Wonders. That's one of the reasons I chose him. The other reason I chose him is because he adds 2 colorless mana, and you spend this mana only to cast artifacts. Also, equipped creatures you control have flying and haste can be significant. I decided a thing that would work with our commander and also works with the polymorph theme and also works with the Dracoplasm. It's a really funny idea I came up with, is vehicles. This is a vehicles deck. And the reason why that works is, of course, in your library, a vehicle is not a creature, but you can turn it into a creature. So that works with the polymorph thing. Also works with our commander. Another reason I wanted a commander that was cheap, that could crew vehicles. That's the main reason for our commander. It can cast vehicles. It can also crew vehicles. Having a power of at least 2, I think, was necessary here. And of course, the silly thing about vehicles and the whole rules thing with vehicles is kind of funny in Magic because, of course, I can crew a vehicle that can then crew another vehicle and then crew another vehicle. So if I have 5 vehicles in play, I can crew one with my commander, and then once it's a creature, I can then use it to crew the next vehicle, and I can sort of create a chain of dominoes there or whatever, and end up crewing all of those vehicles. Well, how does that do me any good? They're all tapped now. I can't attack with them. They're being used for my Dracoplasm. They're Dracoplasm fodder, right? So once I've crewed all those vehicles, I polymorph one of them, likely the smallest, or maybe my commander. Again, I could just polymorph my commander, and then out comes my Dracoplasm. And of course, as it enters the battlefield, I sacrifice any number of creatures. I'm going to sacrifice all my vehicles. That's the funny way that it just kind of worked out great with both the Dracoplasm and the not having creatures in my library thing. So now my Dracoplasm comes out. I sacrifice all the vehicles. It's now a 2020 or something like that. And hopefully I will have an equipment to stick on it so that I can immediately swing with it and maybe kill somebody. That's the deck. It's a really silly idea, but it does work really well. I also made another Balrog deck, a commander that I have revisited a bunch. I just think this is a fantastic Voltron commander. 8/8 trample haste ain't bad for a Voltron commander, and also when it dies, you may exile it. When you do, for each opponent, exile up to one target creature that player controls. So of course, it's just a way to keep your opponents from killing your commander. Just want to lose your best creature? Stay away from my commander if you don't. I mean, they still might, but it is a nice, it's nice to have that payoff on your Voltron commander to, if my opponents do kill it, because of course they probably eventually will, at least I get that nice little added bonus. The cycling and the treasure tokens, I mean, it's okay. You can use it, and I did build around that a little bit. You can get your commander into hand, then cycle it, get the treasure tokens and the card draw, and then reanimate your commander. There's some reanimation in this deck as well. Of course, that just works with what we're doing. There is a little bit of a sacrifice theme. Of course, that works in Rakdos colors. One of the main reasons I revisited this is because I thought this commander worked great with my Super Voltron idea. My Super Voltron idea being I have a lot of these effects that I don't have to re-equip, right? And again, that's why we're more okay with our commander dying, because I could just have my commander come into play, and rather than having to stick a bunch of stuff on it, it just has these abilities already, right? Effects that give it, that's the Super Voltron ideas. I just have these global effects, like just enchantments in general, that will give my commander these abilities as soon as it hits the battlefield. Backgrounds work really good here, right? Like Agent of Shadow Thieves, commander creatures you own have. So that ability is just on it as soon as it hits the battlefield. Whenever this creature attacks a player, if no opponent has more life than that player, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it gains Death Touch and Indestructible to the turn. Hey, that's pretty good, especially for our commander that has Trample and Haste. Death Touch and Trample go really, really well together. So revisiting Balrog, I think I've done it before. It's another commander that I think is pretty underrated. I know Voltron is not a great strategy, maybe in the commander format. I don't know, maybe it's getting a little bit of a revival. I really like this as a Voltron commander, and I like it as the Super Voltron idea as well. I will end off with Asmira Holy Avenger, another commander that I've talked about on my channel quite a bit. Very old commander and a very underrated commander. I guess I could have included this in my underrated commanders video, and I ended up making this deck for a very particular reason. I did quite a bit of complaining this year about the directions the commander is going and all of that, and I had a guy comment, I can't remember the video it was, but he commented, hey, if you like all those older cards, maybe you should try PreEDH. What is PreEDH? It is basically pre-modern, I think, but EDH. So basically, you are, I think I'm getting that right. You are playing cards before, of course, where the modern era starts, which is Mirrodin block, right? But basically, all you have to do is look at the border of the cards. All modern borders are the modern format, and pre-modern is everything before that. And of course, for that reason, all your cards in your deck, I mean, don't have to be, but are going to be likely old school bordered. So of course, obviously your commander also has to be old school bordered. So you're doing the pre-modern thing, but in EDH. So you're not using any newer cards. Obviously, you're not using any cards that were printed for Commander. They're all just cards that, again, sort of how the Commander format is supposed to work. And of course, I was super intrigued by this idea. I looked into it. Just finding a multicolored creature that is legendary. I mean, obviously, you're not going to have a lot of legendary creatures to choose from at all, but finding one that's multicolored, I mean, you don't have to, but obviously, because of the color identity thing, having a multicolored commander can be really, really important, especially if you're super limited on the cards you can include, which of course we are going to be here. I thought, I don't know if I want to do a monocolored commander because that could be really tough. I wanted a multicolored commander, and I thought Asmira Holy Avenger was a great one. And this was such a joy to make this deck. Just going down the rabbit hole of all these old cards. Again, this is why I love the commander format. And one of the reasons I started playing it in the first place. I can just throw in cards like Saber-Tooth Nishoba, which is a card that I just, it's just a good card. Does it fit with what I'm doing? I mean, obviously I want a lot of creatures in my deck, so I put it in for that reason. But this is, of course, a Method 1 deck. I am building around my commander, but because I'm so limited in what I'm doing, it's a little bit Method 2, where, of course, I have to stick to a certain number of cards. So I put Saber-Tooth Nishoba in there just because I think it's a great old creature that I've always wanted to play. And that's one of the reasons I play the commander format. Krosan Beast is another one. Just a funny old card. It's actually a squirrel. It's actually a pretty good card in a commander game. Really cool art and a really neat creature. And I throw it in this deck because it fits with what I'm doing kind of, because it is a creature. Obviously, I could just put any creature in the deck, but also it's just this funny old card that I could throw in the deck. So there's a lot of that. Obviously, you run into some problems with, say, the removal, and I put a card like Afterlife. Funny enough, this is a card that did get played in the commander format back in the day. 2 and a white instant, destroy target creature, can't be regenerated. Its controller creates a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. When the commander format was first starting out, this was actually considered, I mean, for most of Magic's history, this was actually considered to be a decent removal spell. Destroying a creature at instant speed for 3 mana was pretty good. Not so much anymore, but that's part of the reason why I liked putting this deck together. It was nostalgia. It was getting back to those old cards that I loved. This is very much in the era, my favorite era of Magic. Basically, this deck, because I didn't really have any really old cards. Of course, they're all very expensive, or most of them are. Basically, we got, alpha, beta, revised, really super expensive cards mostly. And then we got Homelands, Fallen Empires, which was mostly really bad sets. And then, in my opinion, the best era of Magic ever is from Mirage, which is really the first great Magic set, in my opinion, as far as just really getting to the power level of everything, where they figured it out with regards to power level, but also just a lot of fun cards, a lot of interesting cards. So Mirage all the way up to, again, Mirrored and Block, which is where you're going to stop. That's the era that I built this deck, and it was just a really fun build. It is a pre-EDH legal deck if you are doing that, and if you're at all interested in giving it a try. Asmira Holy Avenger, I think, is a pretty underrated commander as well. Really, the nostalgia of putting this deck together, I thought was really fun. And I ended off there because I wanted to end off on a high note. I love making commander decks. It's what this channel is all about, and it's what one of the biggest things I love about the commander format is I'll never stop. As much as, whatever the direction that Wizards of the Coast or Commander goes in, even if I don't like any of that, I'm still going to just keep making decks over and over and over again, and probably revisiting commanders, revisiting ideas, just doing it a little bit different. You'll never run out of ideas building decks in the Commander format. That's one of the things I love most about this format. All the deck lists for these guys are in the description below. Feel free to run with them yourself. Have a happy new year, guys. I will see you in 2025. That is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.